On this episode of the podcast, I have with me Eric Valasek. He is an engineering leader. We're going to be talking about the relationship between engineering, product, and the business. So we're going to talk about how is that dynamic between the CEO, the product team, and the engineering work. We're going to talk about prioritization. Obviously, every business has to make money, so we're going to balance out how sometimes those initiatives drive requirements, and might talk about some tech debt because sometimes you have to incur it to facilitate, or maybe you don't. We'll ask Eric. And then also, as an engineering leader, how does he keep his team insulated from some of the things that are happening outside of their purview, and how does he keep his team focused? Eric, thanks for being on the show.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Okay, so this topic, the relationship between some key players within engineering, product, and the business, I guess let's talk about that, right? So this episode came up, we're talking about how important it is to balance the needs of the business with also how engineering runs. So the dynamic at the highest level, and I guess, when we're talking about the CEO, we're talking about product, and we're talking about engineering, the direction of the company is super important. That dynamic does have shifts, ebbs and flows, and there's other priorities that are coming up. In your experience, when you are working in that small team or that small environment where you're pretty close to the CEO and pretty close to the other teams, talk about that relationship. That could be a good starting point.
Yeah, so this relationship is relatively complicated, right? You have to generally balance the need for the business to make money. You need to balance your engineering momentum, and you need to balance what product wants to deliver to those customers. Product will generally have a lot of studies that kind of go out and look at what your customers or your soon-to-be customers want and what they want in a product. And so balancing that trifecta, each one of those you can think of as a bar stool of the company. Any one of them breaks, the stool's going to fall over. So you need to really balance all those competing interests.
And I guess when you're talking about those competing interests, those decisions are being made for the business. That's what everyone's there for, if you're a for-profit company. So those decisions are being made, drive that business forward. And I guess sometimes, what's being decided might or might not be the best for engineering. I guess when you're in that dynamic and you're looking at that relationship and you're looking at prioritization, how soon do you start thinking about your team? Do you start thinking about it as you're kind of going through strategic discussions, that dynamic, or is it, listen, you got to table the technology. Don't worry about technology. Focus on what the real business problem is. And then you'll go see whether or not technology can address it. And if not, you go back to those stakeholders.
Yeah, you're really having those conversations day one, and you're thinking about your team day one, minute one of these conversations. Inherently, as you're a leader of your team, that team could be 5 people, that team could be 100 people. You know the natural momentum and the natural capabilities of that team. So you really take these decisions head on, and you start with your team. You know what they can address. You know what problems they're capable of solving. And largely, they're capable of solving lots of problems, but what you really need to do is make sure that the business prioritizes what the customer needs right away. Like, you need to really spend time on your core business. You need to really spend time. I've heard it called your hedgehog concept, your core business, what you think is your driving North Star. And you really need to kind of focus around that. And you need to make sure as the engineering leader that, your product and CEO don't kind of lose sight of that. You don't always want to chase what's new, what's hot. You don't want to distract from your core competencies.
Absolutely. I guess when you're thinking about that and you're viewing those core competencies, and as you mentioned, what your team can do. I guess as you're starting to pick up projects that might be pushing you into other areas that maybe your team doesn't have core competencies in, or they're new skills the team's acquiring. I guess when the dynamic shifts, and I guess some of that is, maybe around, more advanced technologies that are emerging and your team has to, improve on, get better at, or whatever it is, ramp up on, whatever you want to call it. When it comes to those and you're thinking about business priorities, some of those bigger strategic shifts that the business might be looking at, how do you, in those cases, look at your team? Because obviously you might know that the team does have a limitation, and you might be pushing into some new areas, and that stretches the team. How do you start incorporating that?
Yeah. So the first place I always look to when we're expanding outside of maybe a core competency, or maybe we're expanding into a new domain, is how do I train the team to handle that domain? How do I get that skill set within the team? Sometimes you hire a consultant. Sometimes you have your handful of engineers take training classes. You can solve that problem several different ways, but the primary thing you need to keep in mind as being a leader is you need to be able to schedule that time, and you need to be able to clearly communicate how long it'll take your team to acquire that skill. And sometimes you go out into the consultancy markets and you can pick up a consultant, or you can pick up a PhD student, or you can add to the team fairly quickly, or it can be a training session where I've had projects where the operating system changed for a chipset, and now you need to bring that skill into the team. And so you have some training, you have some classes, you have teachers come in, you up level your team for that new operating system, whatever, and those tools. So you can go about this two different ways, and if you see this as being a long-term investment, a lot of times you'll really want to focus on up leveling your team. You really want to build those skills within your team. So you don't have to go out to these consultancy markets. You don't always have to pay higher premium for that skill. And in this example, it was an operating system for a low-level chipset, and we were going to use that chipset in the next 3 or 4 products. So you really wanted to make sure that skill was in the team. You really wanted to encapsulate it within the team, and then you could always take that one step further when you're planning this development for years. You can say, okay, well, we're going to have 5 products. We're going to need to hire this skill set, one person a year for the next 5 years, to kind of maintain that team and maintain that knowledge base within the team.
I guess, and I think the way you outlined it, that's fantastic. Let's talk about maybe the aspect that kind of branches out from that. And obviously, it's the impact to the team in this scenario where you do want to upskill, you want to bring in some of those learnings into the team. There's a lot of value in that. How do you adjust for the team's delivery capacity and capabilities when you're going through something like that?
Yeah, and this goes back to what we kind of talked about, the installation of your team. You really want to give the team space to learn and bring the skill up. So you would naturally kind of dial down your momentum, dial down the expectations while you bring on new skills to the team. You want your engineers to be able to focus on learning, especially when there's a new skill to be had and there's a new technology to be learned. You really want that space. You really need that space to learn. You don't want to shortcut it, because a lot of times that will hurt your momentum further down the line. And getting a solid base, getting a good understanding, getting the team on board is more important than short term to help your long-term strategy. And that's kind of, if you're a C-level company, yeah, you might not exactly have that time and capacity. You might need to, as I go out to consultancy markets and kind of get to your next milestone before you can actually make those long-term plans. But if you're in the Series A, Series B size company, having that 2 to 3 year timeline, building core competencies within the team, it's really important for your future momentum.
I guess as you're kind of talking about that, and we're you obviously mentioned you got to slow down some of your momentum when you're undergoing these shifts, right? And maybe some companies, as they're approaching Gen AI, they have to ramp up on how to work with a variety of new skills that maybe the team doesn't have a lot of experience with, or they're picking up new skills to kind of complement moving into other advanced technologies. When you look at that, obviously the notion of you're used to a certain cadence, you're used to a certain level of quality, certain amount of tech debts and incorporated. A lot of these things and factors are known going through development life cycles. As you're kind of branching in and the team is learning, obviously you don't want quality to dip, but I guess sometimes it's hard not to have some more blips on the screen, right? Just because you're doing something new. Are there things? Well, actually, before I ask that question, should there be a dip in? I know velocity. You said you're going to slow things down, but quality. Let's talk about that. Is there going to be a dip in quality, or is that something growing pains? You just have to accept people are going to learn as they grow.
Yeah, and that's where you can kind of negate some of the dip in quality if you spend your time up front. And that also depends on the business leader, right? This goes back to the relationship with your CEO and your head of product or your product engineering group. you can make that trade-off, right? You can say, hey, we are going to go at the same momentum with a new technology, but yeah, there's a possibility that our quality is going to slip. Or you can say, hey, look, we're going to slow things down and our quality will be relatively the same. It's never perfect. Like, this is not, no one's perfect, so expect some blips. But, you can make that trade-off. You can have those discussions, but you generally can't have both, right? You can't have speed and quality with the same size team with new technologies, right? You kind of have to plan those. You have to plan those. You have to plan that development cycle, right? And some customers are okay. Oh, all right. Well, my Bluetooth didn't connect 99% of the time. It connected 98% of the time, right? Like, those kind of things, you can make those trade-offs, but you have to understand that as an engineering leader, you need to bring that to the table. You need to have you need to bring that up front for the other, two pillars to have that discussion.
And I guess as we're kind of talking about, and I appreciate that you pulled in that relationship again, and I guess as you mentioned, that dialogue with the other business leaders, the CEO, people responsible for other areas you're interacting with as an engineering leader. When it comes to that notion that we have a couple options, right? We can go slow and steady and less mistakes, or we go faster, we break things and we fix it faster. When it comes to these type of projects, and you have to obviously make some decisions, as you're looking at these decisions and the trade-offs for what could turn into tech debt, I mean, not necessarily will be tech debt, but could turn into tech debt. Are there times when you're going to be strategic when you see that tech debt and you're like, you know what, it's worth it for us to do X because, there's a value to the company to go faster and we'll deal with the consequences? Or is that something generally, as in your philosophy, you try to avoid that as much as possible?
No, I'm strategic in taking on debt. There's in the startup world, you will always take on debt of some level, but it's where you take it on and how you plan to pay it off. If you're bringing on a new customer, let's say it's going to 5x your business, you're going to take a lot of risk. You are going to launch as many features that lands that customer as you possibly can. And in doing that, you will assume some level of debt, and that can be on the B2C side or it can be on the B2B side. Those customers, you'll have to balance that debt. Those customers will be onboarded. You'll hopefully have a little bit more money in the bank, and you will have the ability to take steps later on. Now, if the debt is in with a foundational technology, I'll say, within your group, it's a core competency, it's a core of your business, I will take less risk with those, because that amount of debt will carry on. It'll actually slow you down further. UI debt, it's very lightweight. In the end of the day, you can take on UI debt. Infrastructure, things are a lot more automated nowadays. You can stand up clusters way faster than you could 5 years ago. So I won't take that on infrastructure side. On data side, your data quality, if you're a data company, the data quality needs to be, at the highest level. Maybe don't take on debt there. Maybe you slow down and make sure that the debt is manageable in those areas. However, if you're not a data company and you're just kind of, your data is kind of going down the bucket, maybe a little bit of debt there isn't that big a deal. It won't slow you down in the future. And you just need to be really strategic around that. Where you plan to take debt, and then how you plan to pay that debt off, and where is that time spent, and who is it going to affect? You really need to analyze that as you're the engineering leader, and you need to express that with the rest of your team.
I guess you referred to the team and wanting to make sure they're focused. Obviously, from that perspective, you can you can't insulate them. Just depends how far and how much. I guess when it comes to these dynamics, these shifts, these strategic decisions, and all of a sudden, they need to go do and learn. How much insulation do they need, or how little do they need? Because obviously, transparency is what everyone strives for, but also too much information sometimes is unnecessary. Is there a balance there?
Yeah. So the amount of information is too much. So you'll have this conflict, and what you really want to say is, there's going to be a lot of horse trading here. Product's going to say, oh, this is the most important thing. The CEO is going to say, this is the most important thing, and what we really want to focus on is this. And it will change from day to day, week to week. So you really want to kind of keep that thrash, that feature request thrash, to a minimum to the engineering team. Because if they spend a ton of time building one thing, and then all of a sudden they need to build feature 2, and then scrap that in feature 1. That will demoralize an engineering team very, very quickly. But it's the natural course of business. There's a lot of shifting around, especially early stage, when you're making customer relationships, where you're building a customer base, whether you're on the B2B side or the B2C side, and you're doing a lot of building. And what you really want to do is, okay, some of that thrash is going to come down. It's natural. Like you're going to build a feature, and all of a sudden, the market doesn't really like it. They really wanted this, and you're going to switch. That is the thrash that you want your engineering team to handle with and be able to deal with. You don't want that horse trading all the time. You don't want that. You don't want them to be part of that, because that's going to A, demoralize people, and B, they'll spend a lot of time building things that might not really need to build. And we can get to specifics. There's clear examples where in my career where we spent like a ton of time building something, and then all of a sudden the product wants to throw it away, and we start over, and then we throw it away, and it creates a headache for everybody. And you really want to stay away from demoralizing your engineering core. It's still relatively hard. I mean, the market is softer for software engineers and hardware engineers, but it's still hard to recruit, especially smaller stage companies. You don't have the name power like Google. You're not getting hundreds of Stanford graduates every day knocking on your door. So getting that team insulated from that kind of level of business thrash, it keeps the business healthy. It keeps people engaged in what they're doing, and it keeps them from quitting, in 6 months. Nobody wants to be, spend 6 months building stuff that just kind of gets tossed to the wayside.
I mean, I think that's that there's a nuance to leadership where that horse trading, as you mentioned, is not something that helps anyone outside that level and that circle and that visibility. So I definitely think that is some great insights. I guess when you're kind of thinking about this relationship, obviously, and you're in service of the business, and obviously technology for technology companies, you have a stronger voice. Talk about, and maybe it's a good final question, talk about that voice from a software engineering leader's perspective, right? So I think if you're in a company where technology isn't driving the product, you have a different voice, different perspective. If technology is part of what your objective is to drive innovation within a company, does your voice change? Is it the same, or what has your experience been?
Yeah, you're in a technology company. Your voice is generally the loudest, right? And it comes from a couple different areas. One is generally your team is going to be the largest team. I've had a handful of organizations where the software team has been the entire company, minus maybe the CEO, maybe not. Maybe the CEO is actually an engineer too. And it's been, 75% for most companies I've been a part of. Obviously, earlier in my career, I was in space systems and in automotive, and those companies, sure, there's tons of other periphery roles. Engineering only makes up half. But at a technology company, you're going to have a very loud voice. So you need to be very careful with that voice. In some instances, you need to be methodical how you use it. You need to be disciplined in how you approach problems. And you don't want to always drown out the business interests. For sure, you're gonna have to make money. That's something that's it is largely, I wouldn't say largely, it's also forgotten. A lot of engineers like, I just want to build this cool thing, and you look at these feature sets and you're like, this is gonna be really cool. This will help my resume. This will do, but none of that helps the business. You need to make sure that the team is focused on helping the business, and so you need to be the voice of like, hey, we can build this, and hey, team, we need to focus on also making money, like having some AR feature in your app that might not help, might be cool, might give you some splash, but your customers might just want to hit a button that says, yes, give me my health advice for the day. They sometimes just want simplicity, and as an engineering leader, you need to be the voice of reason with your team, going down and saying, hey, look, we're going to need to focus on the business. And these are the features that we're focusing on. And then going back up to the CEO and head of product or any of those kind of relationships, you need to say, hey, look, this is what the team can deliver. These are the technologies we can focus on. And then let's make that balance. And again, several companies, the software team's been 80% of the company, and you need to be really careful that you don't I think I won't say overstep your bounds, but you want to be careful with, or maybe guardrailed on how you approach some of your problems that, affect the bottom line, affect the top line.
I love it, Eric. That's some great insights, and I like the viewpoints, and I hope everyone will get value from it. And I'm sure we might have some follow-up questions that I didn't get to ask you. If somebody does have a follow-up and they want to connect with you, what is a good way of doing that?
Right now, the best way is LinkedIn. So you can find my LinkedIn profile. It's Eric Valasek, and there are not a lot of Eric Valaseks out there.
Okay. I love it. We'll definitely put in the show notes. People can reach out if they are, they do a follow-up. I really do appreciate you coming on. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for providing some of the insights. I think it was fantastic.
All right. Thank you for your time, Amir.
Absolutely. All right. That's it for this episode. Be back again. Different guest, different topic. Until then, two things. One, I think Eric did a fantastic job talking about the dynamic in the relationship at a very high executive level, engineering leader, product leader, CEO. And also, not only that, but how does he help his team? How does he shield his team? When does he want to provide some of that exposure or not that exposure? As he mentioned, that horse trading might not be beneficial for the team if they're looking to stay focused. And we also talked about upskilling and handling tech debt and a couple other things. Share this episode with another engineering leader or someone else who's interested in understanding that relationship. And I'd really appreciate that. Also, like, subscribe, comment. Let me know how the show's going for you. I'd appreciate that as well. Until next time, thank you and goodbye.